In Belgium, the Summit of the People started in which social movements and political forces from all over the world met. At the same time, the European Union and the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States prepared to hold their third summit in the same city. In Argentina, indigenous movements mobilized to the National Congress and the Supreme Court of Justice to demand the repeal of the constitutional reform in Jujuy province. And in Russia, authorities confirmed that the attack on the Crimean bridge was carried out by 2 Ukrainian drones. A couple died and their daughter was injured as a result of the attack. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from TeleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. On Monday, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, officially welcomed the President of Brazil, Lula da Silva, who arrived in Belgium to attend the start of the summit between the European Union and the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. Von der Leyen expressed to the Brazilian leader the EU's commitment to resolve the remaining differences with Mercosur as soon as possible in order to be able to conclude a trade agreement. Meanwhile, the Brazilian president celebrated the return of his nation to the international scene and pointed out that the return of Brazil to the European Union is extremely beneficial. On Monday, Lula will participate in a business forum with representatives from both continents in the morning and in the inaugural session of the summit in the afternoon. And preparations are underway in Belgium for the summit between the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, and the European Union. The meeting will begin on Monday with a gathering of representatives from 60 countries seeking to strengthen and modernize cooperation relations after 8 years without an event of this kind. The working delegations arrive in Brussels in advance to negotiate the declaration that is expected to be approved at the end of the summit on Tuesday. Among the points still under discussions are the common position in relation to the conflict in Ukraine and the measures to mitigate the effects of climate change. In Belgium, the Executive Vice President of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, arrived in Brussels on the occasion of the third EU-CELAC 2023 summit. Delcy was welcomed by the Venezuelan Foreign Minister, Ivan Gil, and the Venezuelan Ambassador to the EU, Jorge Valero. The Vice President said that the Bolivarian diplomacy of peace defends respect between equals and is the voice of all the world's peoples. She also pointed out that Venezuela would defend relations of respect between nations at the summit. The Vice President will attend the summit on behalf of the President of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro. In this context, the President of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, also arrived in Belgium to participate in the 2023 CELAC EU Summit. Minutes after his arrival, the President held a meeting with Cuban residents in Belgium. Also, the Cuban President said that during this summit he will address issues such as climate change and the fight against inequalities. Social movements and progressive political forces from Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean launched the Brussels-2023 People's Summit, a space to outline the construction of a more just world. The two-day forum at the Free University of Brussels is seen as a scenario of struggle for the right of the peoples to peace and sovereignty, and at the same time a meeting to dream of that world without marginalized people or relations of North-South domination. On Monday morning, 3 simultaneous panels were developed in which thematic support in peace in Latin America, the impact of the blockade on Cuba, and the media reality at the international level and in different countries were discussed. The People's Summit will be held in parallel to the third summit between the European Union and the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. The closing ceremony is expected to be attended by several Latin American leaders. In other topics, in Argentina, indigenous organizations agreed to maintain mobilizations against the government of the province of Jujuy in connection with the Sovereign Assembly of the Third Millennium of Peace. The participants reject the constitutional reform imposed by the governor of Jujuy, Gerardo Morales, for violating the right to protest and the right of indigenous peoples. Those mobilized announced a walk to the National Congress and the Supreme Court of Justice to request a repeal for the constitutional reform and federal intervention in the province. Representatives of indigenous peoples announced that they will continue the popular mobilization until the measure is revoked. On Sunday, a shooting occurred in a popular market in Panama, while hundreds of fans were watching the Gold Cup final on television. No victims were reported. The shooting began in the seafood market of the Panamanian capital during the second half of the gameplay at the Sophie Stadium in Los Angeles, California. The same triggered a stampede of the people following the final on television. Official reports informed that there were no injuries and at least one man was arrested after the shooting in this market located by the sea and close to the old part of the Panamanian capital. Police officers deployed at the scene refused to give further information to journalists about some details of the incident. Relatives of missing persons in Mexico marched Sunday in Guadalajara to demand authorities not to discard any search for the victims. On July 11th, a police patrol was attacked in Tlajomulco, leaving 6 people dead and the disappearance of others who were at the scene. To this date, and given the lack of results, family members marched together to demand that the search continues. Likewise, mothers, children, and grandchildren of people whose whereabouts are unknown constantly carry out expeditions with picks and shovels in various inhospitable and insecure points of Mexico, looking for the whereabouts of the victims. Popular protests continue in Guatemala against the judicial decision to suspend the Semilla Movement Party after being elected to participate in the presidential runoff next August 20th. On Sunday, several groups and social organizations gathered in front of the main headquarters of the public ministry for the 4th consecutive day. Demonstrators demand the resignation of both the Attorney General Consuelo Porras and the head of the Special Prosecutor against Impunity, Rafael Curruchiche, following the request of temporary suspension of the Semilla Movement Party. The 7th Criminal Court ordered the temporary suspension of Semilla's legal status. However, the Constitutional Court granted the political organization a provisional injunction allowing it to participate in the presidential runoff next August. Let's now take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. All the stories are coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back from the South. On Monday, the National Anti-Terrorist Committee reported that the Crimean bridge was damaged due to the attack of surface drones of the Ukrainian armed forces. A couple was killed and their daughter was injured during the attack. Russian Ministry of Transport informed that the supporting structure of the bridge was not damaged, but the road on the sections from the Crimean side were affected. The governor of the Crimean Peninsula, Sergei Askizionov, urged citizens to refrain from traveling across the bridge and to choose an alternative land route for safety reasons. The senior official said state agencies are working on the incident with the assistance of the government of Moscow in order to normalize the situation. In Thailand, citizens took to the streets to protest against senators for not respecting the will of the voters and not electing Pita Limjaroenrat as prime minister. The demonstrators marched from the Monument to Democracy to the Center of Art and Culture in Bangkok, capital of the country, in favor of democracy and to show their rejection of the senators' blockade. These citizens also demanded the resignation of the senators who abstained and voted against Pita Limjaroenrat, who was supported by only 13 of them. In view of this, Pita only obtained 324 votes, 51 less than the number needed to be appointed prime minister. Those mobilized warned that they will intensify protests if a second parliamentary vote scheduled for Wednesday, July 19th, fails to install the candidate supported by a majority coalition. Southern Chinese provinces are recalling ships to port and suspending some ferry and railway services amid warnings of strong wind and heavy rain caused by the approaching Typhoon Talim. According to the Hainan Meteorological Service, Talim is expected to come ashore on the coast of Guangdong province as well as the province of Hainan on Monday evening. Currently classified as a severe tropical storm, Talim is predicted to strengthen into a typhoon or a severe typhoon upon landfall. On Sunday morning, the Hainan Meteorological Service upgraded the emergency response for typhoons from level 4 to level 3, predicting intense rainstorms from Sunday on. Hainan has warned ships operating in nearby seas to return to ports ahead of time to find shelter from the wind. In Peru, the Ubinas volcano located in Moquegua registered in the early hours of Sunday morning new explosions accompanied by emissions of ash. According to information provided by the Geophysical Institute of Peru and replicated by the National Institute of Civil Defense, in the last hours ash emissions reached a dispersion radius of more than 10 kilometers. Likewise, there is evidence of continuous ash dispersion towards the east, south, and southeast sectors. In view of the situation, the authorities recommend the population to stay away from the area of the event, to cover their nose, mouth, and eyes, and to keep doors and windows closed. Meanwhile, the National Emergency Operations Center continues to carry out constant monitoring in coordination with regional and local authorities. The South Asian country reported 1,623 new cases of dengue fever in a 24-hour period on Saturday, the highest number of hospitalizations for mosquitoes-borne disease in a single day this year. More than 11,000 dengue fever patients have been hospitalized in Bangladesh in the first half of July. During the period from July 1st to the 15th, 7 more dengue deaths were reported, bringing the number of dengue deaths to 100 over the course of the year 2023. Of the new patients, 1,168 were admitted to hospitals in Dhaka and the rest outside Dhaka. A total of 4,947 dengue patients, including 3,238 in the capital, are now being treated in hospitals across the country. TeleSUR English launched its own videos on demand site for you to go and revisit our interviews, top stories, special broadcastings, and more. Just go to the top left corner in our website homepage and click on the video option to access our VOD platform. Now we're going to take a final short break, so don't go away. Welcome back from the south. In Sudan, 1 in every 2 children are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance caused by the 3 months of armed conflict, according to a UN report released on Tuesday. The UN Children's Fund reported that about 1.5 million children are living away from home since the fighting between Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces broke out on April 15th, although some are still in Sudan. UNICEF Sudan has provided sanitation supplies to more than 3 million children and women and safe drinking water to 1.4 million people. Humanitarian crisis is further deepening in the country, with the ongoing conflict showing no sign of de-escalation. So far, more than 3,000 people have been killed and 6,000 injured due to the conflict. According to UNICEF, over 2.9 million people have been displaced across Sudan and into neighboring countries. A large number of Sudanese refugees who arrived in Libya fleeing fighting in their country are still living in makeshift shelters. Refugees eat on the streets what many people offer them and lack medical care. Meanwhile, they try to call the attention of the United Nations, asking it to pay attention to their problems. Sudan has been rocked by violence since April 15, when tensions between the army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces erupted into open clashes. The conflict has killed more than 3,000 people, according to June data, although the actual number of casualties is likely to be much higher, according to doctors and activists.
Thank God we arrived in Libya safely. We were suffering in Sudan. We fled the war. We had arrived here on the 3rd of May, and when we went to the UNHCR, they did not care about us. They did not even notice our presence. We eat from the streets. Some people feed us while we are on the streets. We want the United Nations to pay attention to our problems. We want them to provide us with some shelter. We, as Sudanese refugees, have come here to apply for asylum, and we do not want to stay here in Libya. We only ask for asylum from organizations. We want to go anywhere safe.
Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammad Shia al-Sudani began an official visit to Syria aimed at strengthening bilateral relations and cooperation in several fields. Al-Sudani was received at the People's Presidential Palace. He then held bilateral talks with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. during which they discussed the current state of bilateral relations and other issues of common interest, in particular joint efforts in the fight against terrorism. According to the Syrian presidency, during the meeting, the two sides reaffirmed their commitment to cooperate in various fields, including trade, transport, and industry. They also addressed ongoing coordination on several political issues. This is the first official visit of an Iraqi prime minister to Damascus in 13 years. During the meeting between the President of Syria and the Prime Minister of Iraq, they ratified the willingness of their governments to eradicate the consumption and trafficking of drugs in society.
We also discussed the issue of drugs, which is currently the most dangerous problem, and it is not different from terrorism. Drugs can destroy societies the same way terrorism can. The Prime Minister and I have discussed a lot of topics indeed.
I agree with Your Excellence on the challenge of drugs, which is a very dangerous issue that threatens our societies and affects our young people in a destructive and dangerous way. We have discussed and agreed today on finding mechanisms for coordination, tracking and following up, and that this would be the best method to tackle this dangerous issue.
A large-scale fire destroyed dozens of homes and stores in Damascus, the capital of Syria. According to the Damascus Fire Department, the disaster occurred as a result of this year's first heat wave currently affecting most of the Syrian provinces, with temperatures over 45 degrees Celsius in some areas. The brigade detailed that there was only material damage and no human loss since they evacuated many of the devastated houses in time. For the time being, dozens of firefighters supported by more than 15 vehicles worked to control the fire in the forest areas in the northwestern province of Latakia and Hama. Like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. From you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media on our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.